have here with me INEC who's a journalist. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Buka. It's good to be here.
Yes, like I said, so much has happened. We did hear from the Minister of Information, who did say that the elections were the freest and most authentic elections in Nigeria so far. We heard Mr. President say that he's very proud of these elections, and he's proud of the legacy it's leaving. But on the other hand, you have a lot of Nigerians, even from people in his party, people who were supporters of him, who say, yes, we see your point, but at the same time, these are not elections that you want to brag about because of a lot of the things that happen around it, whether it's with regards to disenfranchisement, whether it's, with regards to how beavers, the most famous word of these elections, became such a huge factor for people, whether for good or bad, for how they saw things, and the violence and all of that. Like I said, a lot has happened since then. Where is your head right now with regards to the elections?
I think, let me take off from where you started. The fact that this election threw up a lot of new vibes, new dynamics. For the first time, we saw the engagement, a robust engagement by the younger generation of Nigerians. The sort of energy they used to embrace Big Brother Naija is the same sort of excitement and engagement we saw, pre the presidential and gubernatorial election, which I think is a plus for Nigeria. Having said that, you also look at the shifts in the voting pattern. You see a lot of upsets here and there. I think those are pluses, and I tend to agree with the establishment in the fact. By establishment, I meant the president and the minister for information, what they've said about that. However, again, the growth of the third force that the obedient movement came to stand for, right? I think it's a great thing that we had another party that could stand up to the establishment party. I think those were pluses, there were gains of this election, and I want to agree, in part, that it was relatively free and fair, given that there were these major upsets in Kaduna, in Lagos, all over the place like that. What I think we failed to build on was the fact that, unlike the 2015 election, Ebuka, where the former president Jonathan played a central figure, he was a unifier at that point. He, even before the election, the collation of the results finished, he owned up and said, you know what, I give in. Congratulations to the president-elect. By that particular action, he saved the country from going to the brinks, because that particular election, I think, was even fiercer than this one. Because remember, it was more of, are we allowing a former general to come on as a president? Have you forgotten all the things that he did while he was a military head of state? And there was a lot of bad blood, there was a lot of back and forth, just like this one. But the man who saved the country at that time was Jonathan, because he came and said, I agree to this. This is where there's a difference in this particular election. This one, nobody stepped down. Followers were, just went haywire. There was a lot of cancel culture post-election, this particular election, which contributed to the bile, the anger, the bitterness, the division that we've come to see. That's where my head is. You asked me.
Yeah, I get that, because I understand what you're saying, and that was also probably a grouse a lot of Nigerians had with sort of the silence. Yes, the candidates, maybe they could have, I don't know that anybody has done anything crazy, because they said go to court, everybody's gone to court. But you mentioned the president there, and there's been a certain silence, or there was a certain silence through the election electoral process from the president that made a lot of Nigerians wonder, what do you think about what's happening? I mean, it's become sort of the norm with this government where we're left to sort of either listen to spokesmen or left to decipher things for ourselves. And in a time like that, I wonder, could something have been said or done? We look at what happened in Adamawa, for example, where until after the fact, Mr. President now says, okay, arrest the wreck. But sometimes why not be preemptive instead of reactive? I don't know if you felt that sense.
I think it's again because if he jumped in at the beginning, people would say, oh, but we have institutions. It's not allowing the institutions to work. I'm not holding brief for the president, but again, we need to see our institutions working. And the heads of these institutions, those who are leading or heading these institutions, act like the leaders that they are.
Okay.
And I think INEC, in this wise, talking about the Adamawa election, did well to come in and say, no, this is what should be, this is what should be. They arrested the situation in good time. And then the president came later to validate the actions of the INEC head.
All right. Sorry, we're joined now by Olufemi Bito, who's a public affairs analyst. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
She mentioned institutions there, and I think the INEC has become probably the most popular or unpopular organization in the country this year, right from the general elections through the governorship and the supplementary ones that were held, And we haven't also heard from the head of the INEC now. Since then, people are wondering, is this guilty conscience? Is it trying to prepare something to explain all of this has happened? Or is it because the matter is sub judice now? He's just said, well, let the court handle it, But we can't overemphasize, and it's been said countless times on television and social media about all the promises that the INEC made, which is where a lot of people's anger comes from. I think people think maybe some people are angry because their candidate didn't win. Maybe there's some of that, but it's a lot of anger from, you promised us certain things, not once, not twice, not in Nigeria, international, you made all those promises. Elections happen, and then you make excuses for why those promises cannot be held against you. I don't know if you see where that is coming from.
Okay, thank you very much, Ebuka. One thing we first of all need to understand is that we have the Electoral Act that was signed to law, you understand, and which gave legal backing to electronic transmission of results. So, but then INEC came during the announcement of the results, and INEC told us, okay, they didn't tell us anything, but then their excuse aftermath was that they had reasons for them not to have followed that process. And of course, we saw when the Minister of Communication, Professor Issa Pantomi, talked about their server being attacked. And I think we need to be fair to INEC, you understand? Because if they are telling you that there's a process, and don't forget, INEC have the right to determine the process. There will still be electronic transmission of results, but they still have the right to determine how the process will go. If you study the Electoral Act very well, so they have that right to determine that. So now when they determine that, okay, the result brought to the collation center in Abuja was what was signed at the state level, right? If all parties agree that, okay, in Adamawa, Lagos, Kano, these are the results signed from the World Collation Center to the local government collation center, to the state collation center, and was the same thing presented. So, of course, I don't think that should raise too much eyebrow because, we've had a lot of givings and misgivings concerning this 2023 general election. But no matter how we want to paint it, no matter how bad we want to look at it, it is still relatively a fair election. You ask me why am I saying that? If you look at the so-called Cardassian states, they couldn't come up with those numbers. Tinubu lost Lagos. El-Rufai couldn't win Kaduna. Kano, so there were a lot of intrigues. Even President Muhammadu Buhari lost his own state. And if you look at the numbers, so which means a lot of things begin to come into question. Do we really have the over 200 million population we've always been told we have? So you understand what I'm talking about? So if you looked at it, which means INEC, they have moved from what it used to be. There's no perfect election anywhere in the world. It's so funny that even the people we call to intervene in our, local democracy, local affairs, they have their own to battle with. We saw what happened in the last 2 electoral cycles in the United States of America. And that is not the first. So we need to understand that Nigerian democracy, we are evolving. We are not there yet. It's a growing stage. So what we just need to do, just like you talked about, is the independence of our democratic institutions. So when we encourage our democratic institutions to, Kabashewu told us that, why will you expect the president to speak as regards the Adamawa wreck, why the situation is still hot? Cut him some slack. Yeah, President Muhammadu Buhari might have all his own, nonchalant attitude towards some major things, but then there are some things he doesn't need to. There are laws and processes. So when we looked at the processes towards this build-up towards 2023 election, the volatility, the candidates, and the way the atmosphere has been heated, even till now. So, but then we need to douse the tension. Like you mentioned earlier, the judiciary, let's allow them, don't preempt. Let's allow the process to flow. Then
all right.
We can now come.
Sorry to cut you in there, because we're still talking about institutions now. And, I said earlier to her that we seem to have an attitude, whether it's this government or Nigerians as a whole, of being reactive instead of proactive. We tend to wait for things to happen and then start to try to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And when you mention institutions there and the elections, the security agencies cannot be left out, because I think that's the one part that we all can agree on, that things were left really badly. We saw so many incidents. People like to call it isolated incidents, but they happen to real people. I have family who was affected during the elections physically, with police and security operatives standing and watching these things, And you wonder, INEC has always said, we can't control the police, we can't control the security operatives, but they're a fundamental part of elections in a country that you said is very volatile. I don't know. We have some state elections coming up. Those ones seem to sort of go better, when they're isolated, as against when we have all of these elections coming together. What should we be doing differently with our security operatives? We've talked so much about police reforms, from NSAS to all of these things, but we saw that they were so integral to making these elections at least seem free and fair.
Thank you very much. You see, I think I've said it before once on this show that we all have a role to play. If you looked at it, the PO, the SPOs, they are families, they are brothers. In fact, they are youths. The largest voting blocks, and we that we are agitating most, the NYC, I think they are usually the POs in all the polling units. Now, this is it. We all have a role to play. When the policeman knows that, okay, if I do what is wrong here, I have citizens who will overpower me, I think they will begin to come to their senses. Away from police reform, these are separate ball entirely. We need to start holding the Inspector General of Police accountable when it comes to our elections. How do you deploy your men? And what are the specific instructions? And what are the ways at which reports? Okay, for example now, I don't think, maybe I don't know, the IG has a complaint unit for this election in its own specifics. You understand? Like, okay, if you have any report as regards any police officer doing what they're not supposed to do, how do you go about it? These are things that we need to, like I said, the institutions all need to come together. And we as a citizen, we form the larger block of the institution. We need to interrogate and do the right thing. Thank you.
Very quickly. Two things. We seem to have gotten used to the militarization of our society. So when we hear the military or the paramilitary, we expect force. But we forget that we're individuals, we're citizens. We ought to be addressed in a decent way. So even when security men, let me put them like security men are out there, it seems that what we expect is once this person is out of step, we expect some kind of force. And when we don't get that, which leads me to the second factor, then we're not able to manage our expectations. I think with the whole election, what we've seen is that we as a people have not been able to manage our expectations, and this is what I see as a failure of the National Orientation Agency as an institution as well. With this kind of election and with the kind of history we've had in the past, you'll expect that an agency like that will be up and doing, will be alive to debunking some things and projecting certain things, certain points, certain things like the B verse you talked about, unpopular, popular. What did the NOA, the National Orientation Agency,
say to
do?
Nigerians about
and
it?
Post the election, what have they done?
Let's talk about post now, because I don't want us to run out of time, because there's a lot of people who believe now that these elections might make people more disillusioned. We already have a tanking statistics when it comes to turnout for elections. Whether it's because we're not as many as we say we are is a whole other conversation, because a lot of people have to mention that.
And
but what does
coming.
this do for elections coming forward? Because I've seen people say, you know what, why do I even bother with this thing anymore? This has shown us that nothing works. You know, how do we get that back? Because the enthusiasm seemed really high for these elections, and I don't know what's going to happen going forward.
You see, as a people, again, it's about managing expectations. This is politics. It's the long haul. It's not instant noodles. If you do it now, this is what I expect, and if I don't get what I expect, I'm not going to do this again. No, that's not the approach for politics. Politics, as I've said, is a long haul. If you didn't win as much as you thought you would, then you go back, reinforce, re-strategize, and strike again. That's what we ought to do.
The other argument is, yes, it's a process, but we've had 24 years now of this Fourth Republic. How much longer before we actually start believing to an extent that our elections? I mean, people talk about the UK, for example. You don't hear about court cases in the UK politics. Yes, they have elections. They might have issues, but I don't know if you've ever heard of a judicial process that someone went to court because something was wrong somewhere. Yes, there will be issues, but why are we still at the point where after every election, lawyers and all the sands come out because they know they're going to have a field day?
Big cash to have. You see, it's still a system problem. And if we looked at it, we can't isolate it like we've always said. So that means, and where we always talk about that, you now need to focus on not just the president, what are the qualities of those you vote for into the National Assembly?
Yeah.
What are their legislative agenda? And how do you do follow-up? Do you understand what you see? It's funny when we begin to measure our legislators with the number of projects they bring to a locality, like look at the roads that pass through my house, he hasn't done it. No, that's not their primary assignment. So it is when we begin to have that quality engagement, they will begin to have laws that we safeguard our system. Like I said, it's a process. Don't let us forget. You said 24 years, so we are building up on something.
Exactly.
All right. Sorry, just before we go, because you mentioned anywhere there, so I guess these are some of the things that they should be doing. But very quickly now, we'll have some state elections coming up. I think Kogi, Bayelsa, there's a few states coming up. What do you want to see differently from what just happened in the last
I think we should become a more sophisticated voting public. All right, we've seen all that has happened in the last 2 months. Those who are going to vote in Kogi, in Bayelsa, and these other places should know better. Go out there and speak with your votes, because that's what we did with this election, and that's how we've caused a shift. That's how come we have more senators in there from the Labour Party, and then we have the APC, and so go out there and speak with your voice. We did it this last elections. We can do it again. Learn from what it shouldn't be about violence, about cancel culture, but about actually standing up. Look at what happened in Adamawa. Okay, so this is going to happen. This is going to stop everybody. Let's redo it. And then they redid it. And somebody was going to come in from the backyard again, and they said, no, stop. You see, so we're beginning to see that it's not business as usual. People are more aware of their rights. They're more aware of their want. You were talking about legislative agenda. We should have the agenda. What is your agenda for Bayelsa State? What is your agenda, the legislature? What is your agenda for them? So instead of wasting time living in the past, we should look at the present crop of senators elected and representatives elected and begin to tell them what we want.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I think that's